Welcome to the Westport Library. Today's program will begin momentarily. Supported by Verso Studios, created locally and shared with the world.
Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Westport Library. My name is Bill Harmer. I'm the executive director of this incredible institution, and I'm delighted to see so many of you turn out tonight for this really important event and gathering. We appreciate it. Tonight we gather as part of the Common Ground Initiative, which is the public library's its forum for public discourse on issues of vital importance to our community. The goal of the Common Ground Initiative is to foster meaningful dialogue, encourage civic engagement, and build a stronger, more cohesive, more resilient community in an era of increasing polarization. Our objective is to shift the focus from winning arguments or debating to making progress on issues, inspiring the community to work towards finding common ground that is beneficial and fair to all concerned. We believe that the public library is central to the civic life of any community, certainly this one here in Westport. Traditionally, libraries have provided access to information, and we still do, and we do that well. But in their evolving role, libraries have become spaces that foster community building, conversation, and experiential learning. So before we dive into tonight's program, I want to take a moment to thank the members of the Common Ground Committee, who are composed of members, your friends and neighbors and colleagues here in Westport. And they've been working this whole year on some new initiatives. And if I could just get them to stand for one moment so we could acknowledge them, I'd really appreciate that. Thank you, team. Your dedication and commitment to creating a space for civil dialogue and community unity are valuable, and we deeply appreciate your time and efforts. Our event tonight, Communicating to Open Minds with Sally Susman, promises to be, I'm sorry? Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. I thought my speech teacher was here for a minute. Our event tonight, Communicating with Open Minds with Sally Susman, promises to be both inspiring and enlightening. Sally Susman, Pfizer's Chief Corporate Affairs Officer, will be sharing insights from her best-selling book, Breaking Through, Communicating to Open Minds, Move Hearts, and Change the World. Drawing from her experience leading Pfizer's communication efforts during the rollout of the COVID-19 vaccine, Sally will discuss the importance of living harmoniously in a divided world, having the courage to speak with candor, and building the essential leadership skills needed for our future. Sally's work is a testament to the power of effective communication and leadership in navigating a complex and often contentious world. We are also fortunate to have our good friend Steve Parrish leading tonight's moderated discussion. Steve is the founder of Steve Parrish Consulting Group, LLC, specializing in crisis management, corporate social responsibility, and public affairs. With his extensive background in corporate affairs and his dedication to public service, Steve is the perfect person to guide us through tonight's discussion. Thank you all for being here tonight and for your commitment to fostering a more united and engaged community. Stay tuned as we have some new offerings of the Common Ground Initiative to come that we're excited to announce in the short-term future here. Now, please, let me hand over the podium to Steve, who will get tonight's conversation going. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. I think we're all in for a treat as we have a conversation with Sally. So here's how the evening is going to unfold. Sally and I are going to have a conversation, and you all get to listen in. But then we're going to leave time at the end for questions from the audience. When we open it up for audience Q&A, if you have a question, it's important that you proceed over to the microphone over here and not stand up at your seat, because we're recording the event tonight. We want to capture the Q&A as well as the conversation. So when it is time for Q&A, just proceed over there to the microphone. And then after we're finished, I'll have some concluding remarks, and we're going to have some time for people to have Sally sign their book, if you like. So as Bill mentioned, this is part of the Common Ground Initiative. My experience talking to people in town is that people are excited about this initiative. They believe in it, they believe in its mission, they believe in its importance. And the other thing I've heard is that people, as important as they think this is, they want tools that they personally can use in their everyday lives in terms of promoting civil discourse, engaging in conversations that will advance the common good and find common ground. So we couldn't have anybody better to help us talk about those things than Sally Susman. Sally has been an advocate for and a participant in search for common ground and promoting civil discourse, and we're thrilled to have her. So, Sally, welcome to Westport.
Thank you so much, Steve. And thank you everyone for coming out on a Monday night and for caring. It's really an honor for me to be here. I was excited to come and receive this invitation. I did a little research, and I found out that on this very stage, many of my idols have appeared: Doris Kearns Goodwin, Laura Linney, Shonda Rhimes, and that you even have Billie Jean King on your agenda. This is quite a hot ticket. I'm also a true library lover. My idea of a perfect vacation is going to see a library that I've never seen. And I had the honor of serving as a trustee for the Library of Congress, appointed by President Obama. And my favorite place to hang out is the John Germain Memorial Library in Sag Harbor, New York. So I feel very, very honored. And I wanted to share a fact, because being here is important. A recent poll by the Urban Libraries Council found that America is losing trust in all their institutions. Only 20% of the people trust the government, but 78% of the people trust their library. So it's great to be here, and I thought I would kick us off tonight, Steve, with a poem. It's a poem called The Second Coming by William Butler Yeats. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed in everywhere. The ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best of all lack conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. This poem was written 100 years ago, just following the Russian Revolution, World War I, and a once-a-century pandemic. And yet it felt relevant and familiar. We've experienced cyber meltdowns, an immigration crisis, a Middle East crisis, climate change, and even an attempted assassination in this country. It leaves me frightened, and it can make people feel despondent and worried that the center will not hold. So the point of tonight is, what can we do? Pull our covers over our head? It doesn't strike me that this is what this audience is about. There are, Steve, positive steps that we can take, and my purpose here is to offer ideas and practical steps so that we can lower the temperature, reduce the pressure, and come together.
Great. So, Sally, let's start it off. I want to read something from the preface in your book, where you say, I'm convinced that with the right mindset, we can build communication muscles that will help us maintain and expand the traditions of storytelling, narration, dialogue, and constructive debate. Common ground and shared ambitions are still possible. As a society and as individuals, we can cut through the noise and clutter to open minds, move hearts, and shift the dialogue in a positive direction. So my first question for you, Sally, is, really? What gives you hope that that can happen?
There are many, many reasons that I feel hopeful. And I thought a lot about hope in advance of this meeting and where can we find hope. I went to my librarian at the John Germain Memorial Library, and I asked her what gives her hope. And she told me it's her new baby granddaughter that gives her hope. For me, I'm very involved in my local community at Sag Harbor and supporting a candidate running for office who I think is a very good man. And doing something at the ground level like that gives me hope. And my work at Pfizer as the Chief Corporate Affairs Officer, where it was my job to roll out the vaccine to a scared, divided, angry world. It had a lot of ups and downs and bumps, and I think we'll probably talk about them. But in the end, it gave me great hope, hope for science, hope for humanity, and hope for us to find a way through. And I can't talk too much about Pfizer without acknowledging my close colleague, Rady Johnson, who's a member of this community and is here tonight with his wife, Diane.
Sally, from reading your book a couple of times now and having a few conversations about it with you, I know that you're a big believer in the power of stories. And for me, one of the most powerful thing about the book is that you use stories in a great way. But in addition to the stories, there are lots of gems of wisdom there. And so what I'd like to do is probe into the stories, but also some of those gems. And I think a good way to do it might be, I've taken some of the chapters, we don't have enough time for all of them, but I'd like to throw out the titles of some of the chapters and let you build on some of the stories and gems that are in that chapter. So chapter 1, What Am I Trying to Say? Where you talk about developing trust, dropping the arrogance, and you really, and Bill alluded to this in his introduction, focus on the difference between a conversation and a debate or an argument.
Absolutely. So let's just go back about 4 years ago when we were in the depths of COVID. And my boss is Albert Bourla, the CEO of Pfizer, who lives not far from here. And Albert flew to Greece to give a talk. And by the time his plane landed, the conference had shut down. Because as you'll remember, doors were closing one after another. So Albert got back on a plane to come back to New York, and he wrote on a little piece of paper that we still have in the office that he had to do 3 things. First, take care of our 85,000 employees around the world, because wellness and employee care became a very big thing. Secondly, we needed to maintain the steady flow of medicine around the world, because horrible illnesses like cancer and Alzheimer's didn't go on break during the pandemic. And third, that we needed to find a vaccine by the end of the year. And that's when I thought, oh no. It's a global pandemic and my boss has lost his mind. Because it was an impossible idea. I then saw Albert do something I've never seen any other CEO do, and I've worked for 9. He looked around the room to appoint someone to lead this, what would be this impossible task, and he assigned himself. And that's when I thought, well, maybe, just maybe, we are going to do this thing. And that I needed to have an intention as clear and bold as Albert's. Now, I'd come to Pfizer 18 years ago because the company had a poor reputation. Big pharma isn't exactly the most popular industry out there. And I thought that I was pretty good at what I would do, and I could fix that in a year or two. Yeah, I had pounded my head against a wall for more than 10 years with very little success. But when the pandemic came, it was an opportunity to do things differently and make bolder change. I started putting previously protected intellectual property up on the website, like how we run our clinical trials. And I know we have a colleague here from the clinical trial group. Because we didn't have years to fill the trial. We didn't have months to debate it. We had 3 weeks to fill that trial. And I decided to embed media along with us for the journey. I had 2 Wall Street Journal reporters and a Nat Geo documentary film crew. And I had many sleepless nights when I thought, great, Sally, you're filming the biggest debacle in corporate history. But I also knew if we succeeded, that this would be the story that I needed to tell. On the day we announced on a Sunday that the vaccine worked, the next Monday, the Wall Street Journal dropped 6 full pages of how we did it, the risks we took, the $2 billion we put at stake, the fact that we took no government money. And their headline in the Wall Street Journal was, Pfizer vaccine, crazy deadlines and a pushy CEO. And they got it. They told the story for me. Today, Pfizer is a top 10 global brand. Our reputation is very high. And I think it goes back to this first concept of the intentionality, that Albert was intentional, that I tried to be intentional. So now, I'm a big proponent of intentionality. I try to do it before every engagement. When I talk to my daughter, I say, be patient, just listen. When I talk to my parents, I try to give them the time that they need. Before I stepped onto this stage tonight, I thought, I hope I can help further the goals of your initiative and of this great library. So I'm all for intentionality.
Great. Chapter 2, sticking your neck out. And one of the things I found fascinating, really interesting about chapter 2 was you referred to Robert Livingston's rules and what, you didn't call them this, but what I'll call the Susman supplements to Robert Livingston's rules. Not that I'm expecting you to recite all of Robert Livingston's rules, but if you could talk a little bit about what those rules encapsulated and what you did and have done to try to build on those rules.
These rules are written by a Harvard professor who's really studied what it takes to have a civil conversation. And if you don't mind, Steve, I'm going to bump the second chapter to what I think is, for me, the most compelling part of the second chapter. Is that all right?
Sure.
Okay. It's about having the courage for candor and how important candor is in our society. So this goes back 40 years ago when I was a young adult starting my career in Washington, D.C., and I was learning about myself, and I realized that I'm gay. And I knew I needed to go home to St. Louis to tell my parents because we were a very close family. My parents were liberals, but I knew this was going to be really bad and tough. And please remember, 40 years ago is like 100 gay years. You know, it was before gay marriage, it was before Ellen DeGeneres, it was before all of these things. And it was the heat of the AIDS epidemic. It was the time when most gay people lived in the closet or on the margins. And I go home to my parents in St. Louis, and I'm so nervous. And we have dinner. My parents say, so, you know, what have you come to tell us? I have a bit of a preamble about how much I love them and how important our family is. And I say these 2 words that changed a lot of lives. I'm gay. And my dad, who's a man I greatly admire, said, you'll never have a spouse, you'll never have children, and you'll never have a career. And my dad wasn't trying to be mean. The words hurt me. It wasn't his intention. It was his parental fear talking and the environment that we were living in at the time. But that courage and that candor create a life plan for me. I wasn't much of a planner at that point, but if I was going to have 3 things, it would be those 3 things. And my wife, who's here with me tonight, we're celebrating our 36-year anniversary this month. We have a 30-year-old badass daughter, and I am deeply proud and grateful for the work that I get to do every day. And I tell you this story, and it's in a business book, and it's not much of a business story, but because I think that when we are candid with each other, we create trust and we build bonds that are extremely important. So like intentionality, my call to you tonight, the call to action is be candid and have the courage for it. And if there's someone that maybe you owe an apology to, but you think, oh, the hurt is too deep, extend the apology. Or if you want to write a love letter to somebody, don't leave it in the draft box, send it. If someone is estranged in the family, reach out. I think that if we're going to be a strong society, we have to have the strength to be courage and candid with one another.
So I want to drill down on this a little bit, and then I'll let you off the couch. You talked about how tough that conversation was, but as I read past that and got to Livingston's Rules and Susman Supplements, it seemed to me that maybe you didn't think about it in those terms at the time, but what you did in those conversations with your parents made use of those rules and the Susman supplements in terms of listening and empathy, et cetera. Do you mind talking about that a little bit?
No, not at all. I mean, we learn a lot through these experiences, and as Dr. Livingston said, and I've tried to build on it, if you're gonna have a difficult conversation, find a safe space. Maybe ask someone their permission to engage you in this conversation. Don't just, rush in. Ask questions, listen, and consider intention. What is their intention? Because often that's where we get tripped up.
Yeah, great, thank you, Sally. Chapter 4, do manners matter anymore? And there's a great quote in your book from Maya Angelou, which I'm happy to read if you like. Give me 1 second to pull it up.
He's very organized, Steve.
Yeah, she says that, and now I can't find the quote.
Is it the one, not what you say, but how they make you feel?
All right, page 65 is what I have in my notes.
Okay.
So here's the quote. I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel.
Right.
So with that as the launching pad, talk about your focus in do manners matter anymore, and how you live that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I had very strict parents, and they taught me a lot about manners. I remember that growing up, you had to come to the Susman family dinner with a news fact. It couldn't be sports, it couldn't be weather, it had to be something that happened in the news that we got from the paper, and we had to discuss it, my brother and me. And I thought this was cruel and unusual. And I didn't know why we couldn't just eat dinner like the other families in the neighborhood. We had to come with these facts. But I see in hindsight that in many ways, this was just one of them. My parents were teaching my brother and me how to be in the world, how to be able to process what's happening around us, how to be able to talk about it and to share it. And I'm incredibly grateful to my parents for doing that. And I know many of you in this audience are parents, and I suspect you've tried equally hard to raise thoughtful and caring people. This became a real business strategy for me when I worked at the Estee Lauder companies for Leonard Lauder. Leonard Lauder is one of the most gracious people I've ever met. Knows the name of the ladies that work behind the counter, knows the name of the person that runs the elevator in the building. And when I was new to the industry, he took me around to meet all the important beauty and fashion editors. And one of them in particular was very rude to him. She kept us waiting. She barely looked up from her desk. She gave us short shrift. And on the way out of the building, Leonard said to me, "Now, don't forget to write her a thank you note." I thought, like, for what? She was horrible to us. And he said, "No, that's how we roll." And he and his mother, Estee Lauder, built their company through this graciousness, through sending thank you notes, through sharing their kindness with people. They took the company public. It's a multi-billion-dollar company. And to this day, I recently went to Leonard's 90th birthday, to which he sent me a thank you note for coming to his birthday. So, you know, it seems that he's a little over the top, but isn't that what we remember and the things that we save? I mean, whenever I get a thank you note from one of my bosses, I file it. And I bet some of you file them as well.
So, same chapter, you talk about, I thought this was really interesting. You talk about the cancel culture. And just tell us why the cancel culture is related to the topic of the importance of manners.
Well, cancel culture comes up primarily in the book around the section also on humor. So the book, as you know, Steve, is 10 chapters, and each one is a sort of singular idea. The hardest one to write was the one on humor, because it's scary out in the world today. People are afraid to make jokes because they're afraid they're gonna get canceled. And many times this chapter ended up on the cutting room floor. I thought, I'm not gonna write about humor, it's too dangerous, I can't do it. And then I thought, I don't want to live in a joyless world. I don't wanna live in a world where we can't joke around with one another, especially in the workplace where we spend so much time. And so I've tried to give some tips about how to be humorous without getting canceled. So first and foremost, you know, make jokes about yourself. It would be terrible to demean anyone else, but it would also be terrible, you know, it would be terrible to demean anyone else, but to make fun of yourself is quite a good tactic because people relate to it. And the other thing is a degree of forgiveness to ourselves for when we make a mistake. I have a project I do with my team every summer where we have open mic night. We have a microphone much like this, and we invite everyone to get up and share their biggest blunder, their most embarrassing mistake. And people start slow, but then soon we're rolling and we're laughing and we're feeling less stigmatized by a mistake that we made. And so I think embracing it is really important. And then lastly, to reach out to those who are canceled. There was an article on the New York Times just a couple of days ago about a woman I know, Sarah Kate Ellis, who runs GLAAD, which is an organization. And the allegations in the story are that she has misused funds. I don't know if she has or she hasn't. I'm not privy to that information. But I do know that she's worked hard for a long time and that she's been a courageous leader. So after I read the story, I just popped her an email and I said, "Hey, Sarah Kate, hope you're holding up. You know, take the high road, stay strong." And we all know when we see people get canceled, and I think our instinct is to kind of shy away from it, but I try very hard to connect with people who seem to be on the verge of being canceled.
You said something there to me that's really important when you talked about learning lessons. And in the book, you talk about how the cancel culture can, well, I just read you what you say. What response is the least gracious, most ungenerous, and completely unkind? It's the brutal smackdown of cancel culture. It's a slap that scars and shuts down any avenue for mutual understanding and dialogue, like learning from mistakes, which is what you just said.
But I've been thinking a lot lately about Jimmy Carter, because we didn't have the word canceled back in 1980, but when he left office, he was essentially canceled. He didn't get the hostages back, he didn't win re-election, and yet he spent the next few decades restoring his reputation, rebuilding trust, working with his hands, being kind and gracious. He's been in hospice over a year. And he recently said that he's holding on so he can vote for Kamala Harris. But I study him, and I like to study other stories like that, because I don't think cancel is forever. I think you can come back from cancel culture. But my request to all of us is to help people come back from cancel culture, not to throw more mud on them when they're down. Help them educate themselves. Try again.
So when people buy your book, I'm going to skip over some of this in the interest of time, but I'm going to suggest that among the first things you do is go to page 69, where Sally has practices of gracious and kind communication, which is so key to the whole notion of civil discourse. There's a chapter on crisis management. There's a chapter on the pitch, which I think in part you were talking about how to pitch a story, but there are lessons there beyond pitching a story to a journalist. Now I want to skip ahead.
Can I talk about?
Yeah, sure.
Can I talk about pitch for just 1 second?
Sure.
This goes back to when I was working at the American Express companies, along with my friend here and neighbor Jim Berrien. Ken Chenault, who was a new CEO at the time, this is the time when the planes hit the World Trade Towers. And Ken was a new CEO. He was actually on the West Coast, couldn't get back to New York because their planes were not flying, but he had a leader's instinct that he needed to get back to his people. The city shut down. His building, which was right next to the Twin Towers, has been hit and is closed. And, somebody in a job like mine probably said, well, you should write an employee letter. And he says, no, we're going to get everybody together from the tri-state region. And he rented out Madison Square Garden. And when he got there, somebody who probably in a job like mine handed him a speech for him to give that he threw away. And he got onto the stage and spoke from his heart. He knew the names of the colleagues who had perished in the tragedy. He waded into the crowd and he touched people. And he said that American Express's best days are ahead of her. And in doing so, he has had a pitch. And that's what I really believe in. The chapter on pitch, as you say, it's not about how to pitch a story. It's not about a sales pitch. It's about a quality and a tone and the way we are in the world to try to keep your eyes light, a smile on your face, a kindness in your voice. Ken does all of that beautifully. And I really admired it, so I wrote about it.
Chapter 7. Hey, who's going to get the credit?
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that.
You bet. And credit claiming is such a thing in our world. During the pandemic, there were many twists and turns to the public debate. And the pharmaceutical industry can be pretty sharp-elbowed with one another. But during this time, we really worked together. We shared many things, information, supply, intelligence, all kinds of things. And we also decided that we would all agree, and we signed a letter, and we published it in advertising around the country, saying no company would cut the regulatory line. Nobody would race to the finish ahead of full data being available, that we would all hold ourselves to the highest integrity. And this all came together over the course of the weekend, led largely by my boss and another gentleman. I was later asked to speak on a panel, and on that panel was someone who wasn't involved in writing this at all, but he was taking credit for it. We did this and we did that, you know, patting himself on the back, and I knew that this wasn't right. And the hair on the back of my neck was going straight up, and I wanted to smash this guy and really say, no, that's not how it went. It went this way, and it was my boss, not your boss, that thought of that. And then it just came over me that it was more important to rise above that moment, and to embarrass him would not make me look good. It wouldn't make anyone feel well, and I just let it go. And we moved on with the panel. But I've seen that guy many times since, and he's enormously grateful. We've become good friends. He's an important ally to me in the industry. And it was really all generated from the willingness to not take credit.
Chapter 10, why is everyone so angry? You use two terms in that chapter that I'd love for you to elaborate on a little bit. Number one, constructive engagement. Number two, harmony.
You bet. To tee this up, I'd like to share some survey data. There's something called the Edelman Trust Barometer that really studies and measures trust across society. And at the time I was writing this chapter, Steve, they put out a poll, or they put out a survey result that said, if somebody was hurt on the ground and you walked past them and you thought that they probably have a different worldview than you, or they come from a different mindset, would you stop and help them? And 30% of the people said, yes, I would. Which means 70% of the people said no, they wouldn't. That 70% of the fellow citizens would not help another person down, hurt, out, just because they thought, oh, he's not like me, or she's not like me. And this really bothered me. And so, you know, I started to think about harmony, and I am a follower of Adam Grant, the organizational psychiatrist or psychologist, who says harmony is the pleasing arrangement of different sounds, not the same sound. So the point is that we have to constructively engage with other people. I'm sure that we're not all here have the same priorities. We don't have the same religious or political beliefs. But together our different notes can be harmonious if we do a few things. If we listen for understanding, but not for rebuttal or victory. If we hold ourselves open to the idea that maybe, just maybe, you're right and I'm wrong about things. And so I feel that this is essential, and people who are communicators, and you did a lot of communicating in your professional life, we have an ability and a sort of a superpower that we should be using in order to help society find its harmony.
So, beyond the book, as we sit here tonight thinking about what we can do in our daily lives to engage in and promote the notion of civil discourse in the pursuit of common ground, what would you suggest that we focus on?
Thank you. I came with 4 ideas that are new for me, because I didn't want to just talk about the book. I wanted to try to make this a bit more current. So 4 things I think we can do. The first one, it seems like I kind of stole your idea because it's called Find Common Ground. and imitation is the highest form of flattery. But
I stole it out of your book.
I challenge us to think, what are the issues that we agree on, that everybody should agree on? And the one I came up with is to address the youth mental health pandemic. The Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, described mental health as the defining public health crisis of our time. And yet, like the poem from Yeats, there's an ever-widening gyre between the number of teens who have, with anxiety, depression, and hopelessness, who receive treatment and those who don't. It's extreme. So that's one idea I have. I would love, to hear from you at some point about what are other real important initiatives that aren't political or divisive. So that's the first. The second one is to really be mindful of our language. I think language has become very coarse, and that in itself is upsetting. Do you remember when TV used to bleep things? You'd be like, bleep. There are no bleeps anymore. If you listen to the news or commentary, the language is horrific. And I asked myself, did J.D. Vance win any friends by saying childless cat lady? I don't think so. Did Hillary Clinton make any friends by calling some people a basket of deplorables? I don't think so. So I think that the choice of our words really matter. I've tried to think about times I've regretted what I've said, and I would ask you to do the same. The third is we have another pandemic of disinformation. And disinformation is everyone's enemy. People are getting news from unfact, unchecked platforms. In fact, I heard, like last week, that President Carter had died. And I cried, okay, only to find out he hadn't died, but it had been put out there as misinformation and disinformation. And I challenge us to really stress test your news sources. Do not only watch MSNBC, Jim. Do not only watch Fox. Watch and read and listen across the board and try to find the facts. And then lastly, I end where we started, which is to seek out hopefulness. I think the fact that you attend tonight is a great expression of your optimism and your hopefulness. And we should keep doing that.
Thank you, Sally. If you have questions, now's a good time to mosey over to the microphone. While people are doing that, sort of the rest of the evening, I'll remind you, after the audience Q&A, Sally has a couple of things I think she wants to say. I'm not sure exactly what. I have just some concluding remarks, and then we'll do the book signing. So, yes, sir.
Tonight, you've sort of been preaching to the choir. People who've come out here really feel that they can communicate with each other. And it's different, though. How do you get through to those people who reject science, who reject experts, who say they know what's true, who wallow in conspiracy theories? How do you get through to these people? That's half of our population.
Thank you for that question. And I sort of saw that half head on when it was time to roll out the vaccine. And it was a crazy, challenging time full of many inconsistencies and conflicts. On the one hand, we didn't have enough supply for everybody who wanted it. And on the other hand, there were people who needed to take it and wouldn't take it. And how I thought I would convince them was wrong. And I learned something that worked better. I thought I would win with my facts and my experts. And so for facts, we had data. We had a lot of data from our clinical trials, from our real-world evidence studies in Israel. We had a lot of facts. And we had some great experts. Also a neighbor up here, Michael Dolston, is our chief scientist. We were talking to Dr. Fauci and his equivalents around the world. And I thought, okay, I've got the facts, I've got the experts, I'm good. Those things did not change anybody's mind. So what did? Two things. First and foremost, personal storytelling. So the grandma at the senior center would say to the other grandparents, well, I got to see my grandkid because I'm vaccinated. Or the college kid would say, I got to go back on campus because I'm vaccinated. And these stories became viral. You know, people were putting them on their Instagram, their stories. And who were the most influential spokespeople? Not my experts, not the politicians, not the rock stars, not the movie stars, not the sports heroes. It was the people closest to them. Kids influencing their parents, the neighbor, the barber, the preacher, the librarian. And so the point is that it's hand-to-hand combat. Sorry for that language. I try to avoid that kind of language. And I never say anti-vaxxer, because I think to call someone an anti-vaxxer is aggressive. But if we can make it a personal project of ours to reach out on a human level across the divide, I think that is our best shot.
Yeah, and before we go to the next question, I would just say, remind folks of what you said just a few minutes ago, which is focus on what we can agree on and build from there. When we kicked this initiative off last year with Senator Roy Blunt, who I know is a friend of yours, he said, you only have to agree on one thing and then build from there. It takes time, and as you said, focus on what we can agree on, develop trust and respect, and build from there. So, yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Charles Riley. I'm a catalog librarian for African languages at Yale University Library. I have a question for you about a side project that I've been doing for about the last 10 years, which is to get involved in public health messaging for Ebola epidemics. Merck has a vaccine, but they haven't as yet shown much interest in supporting ways of getting the public health messaging out there in translations into local languages for Congo and Uganda, Guinea, Liberia, Sierra Leone. What would you say might be a good approach to approaching Merck to help support this kind of effort?
Well, as a colleague from Pfizer, I think your question is actually a great question. And just to dive back to COVID for 1 minute, the science, I give it A+. The communications, C-. Communications did not go well. People weren't committed to it. Wear a mask, don't wear a mask, stand apart, don't stand apart. And healthcare communications is very difficult. Our project is to focus on eliminating blinding trachoma in sub-Saharan Africa. Most of the companies do have a project of this type because we all believe in it and feel it's important. And committing to it has been a multi-decade experience. I don't know how to get more support from Merck, but I do have two colleagues right up front here who are both experts at this, and perhaps we could huddle after the talk.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Mark?
Yeah. Steve, Sally, hi. I wanted to visit back to cancel culture a bit, and the question at the end of this is to ask you what you see at a deeper level. What is this thing? Because it's, in my experience as a few years, I've never lived in a time when this was possible or prevalent or extant. And where I was trained and came up, my mentor would teach that we could, this is gross, but we could literally take off your arms and legs, but Sally or Steve would still be sitting there, and as long as they could voice, it was Sally and Steve. You know, without the arm, doesn't matter. It's still, that's Steve, that's Sally, and they're speaking their voice. But the one way to wipe a person out for sure is to go no to the voice. And so it seems that it's easy to sit here and say it's somebody else doing the canceling. But I look to myself and say, you know, what is it that I can't be with in the communication? And there's so much in the communication. There's the words that we say. There's the communication that goes through the words, which aren't the same as the words. And there's the emotional states. And so all of that is available to us. So where do you think this emerged? It seems like it emerges in some sort of conspiracy. Yeah. I wouldn't go up to you and blow your head off with a gun, but I think it's okay to go up and not listen to you.
Well, I'm going to venture an answer. I don't know that I'm right, but two things strike me as having risen in the last 30, 40 years that I think have contributed to this. The first is identity politics or stakeholder identities. So people say, you know, I am this, I am Jewish, I am female. This is the identity that becomes very singular. And it's not very expansive because we're all a lot of things. But this identity, the rise of identity politics and sort of social stratification and social silos, I think is deeply dangerous. And the gas on the fire of that is social media. And that people can, without any responsibility, doesn't cost any money, can say whatever they want and appear to be a source of something worthy or some news outlet. And they're not that, they're just maybe a person in their, in their pajamas in their basement, but they have this tool. And so in my mind, and I've tried to think a lot about this, these two things combine. And so to unwind it, I think we have to see ourselves more broadly. We're neighbors, we're friends, we're colleagues. And we need to, I am preaching to the choir, I confess, but we need to spend more time like this and less time just behind the screen, is my belief. What do you think, Steve?
I agree with that, and I think sometimes it's so easy to think the problem is so big that it's insurmountable, and therefore it's not worth doing anything. And I think once that view becomes prevalent, we have a real problem. And what we have to do what we can do. And that means, going back to Bill Harmer's opening, in our lives in this community, there are things we can do. We can be better listeners. We can engage with people. We can constructively engage, as Sally said. And we can listen. We can drop the arrogance. We can be humble. And progress will be made if we focus on doing the right thing. That's my 2 cents worth. Thank you. We have time for one more question. Thanks, Mark.
Look forward to reading the book. Great job. I wish I'd have asked my kids to bring a fact, a news story to the table, but we're never at the table, and no one really is with their kids these days. So my question is, with teenagers that are much brighter than people give credit today, but they're terrible communicators, how do we work on that? How do we make them better communicators? How do we make them care about what other people think and say, or at least pretend to care about what other people are interested in? Because I struggle with that every day.
Oh boy, parenting advice, I'm not an expert, and I'm sure I could have done a far better job raising my own kids, but I do think that COVID was a big setback in this regard. And our daughter was in graduate school, had to come home, now has a job, remote, works at home. And I think that if we can come together more frequently in person, that it really will encourage people to be more curious about one another, to be more caring about one another. It really concerns me that a lot of young people in the workplace just want to talk to me by text. And it makes me kind of crazy. And so I try to earn their time, meet for lunch, working really hard to pull people out of the COVID hole and back into a world where we're riding subways and buses together. We're walking together. We're sitting at a table, having dinner together. I feel those things are really easy, not easy, but important steps.
Thanks. Thank you all for the questions. I know Sally has a couple of things she wants to say before we wrap up.
Well, just two things. First, a deep thank you for a humbling invitation and an attentive audience. I'm super grateful to you. And I thought I would close with a poem, since I opened with a poem. This one is by Ha Jin, and he's writing about a different center, not the society center, but the center within our souls. And the poem is called A Center. Here's a stanza. You must hold your distant center. Don't move, even if earth and heaven quake. If others think you are insignificant, that's because you haven't held on long enough. As long as you stay put year after year, eventually you will find a world beginning to revolve around you.
Thank you, Sally. I just want to conclude with two brief quotes from your book. The first is from the preface, where you say, communications and leadership are not only entwined, but inseparable. And then the last sentence in the book. Seeking harmony amid discord is always a worthy pursuit. So Sally, I thank you for your leadership and for your courage in seeking harmony. It's been a pleasure to have you here, and we thank you for sharing with us.